Okay, so I've actually been to this location before, but after a lot of drama this morning at my previously visited locations down in Fethiye, I decided to drive nearly 4 hours further north back towards Izmir and revisit this church that I've been to a couple of years ago now. Today I want to discuss with you about my settings in camera with my Canon R5, and of course some of these are transferable to other camera manufacturers and bodies as well. And I want to discuss with you the settings that I use to assist me capturing interior and architecture photography. And of course, I brought you back to this location because it's pretty sunny. It's a nice day actually, beautiful outside. And I know that there's going to be some nice light coming in here later on, and also there's some lovely colours and textures up high in this location. So I'm going to grab some images, and a little bit later on, we'll talk about those settings. So everything's pretty tall in here. And we're going to opt for the 17mm tilt shift lens. Mainly so I've got reach, because the ceilings are incredibly high in here. I would have loved to have seen it back in the day. It would have been fantastic. Just hope they don't seal it up like they are with so many others around the country. You know, they've got these historical sites, and when they're not mosques, they basically gate them, lock them up and tell you they're closed, and that's the end of it. Which is incredibly sad, because obviously this location has been here for years, stood the test of time, and yes, it's a bit ruinous, but ultimately it's beautiful and should be more available to the public. And it's funny how this one's open, but Karakul Ghost Town, the churches there, are not open, yet they're in way better condition than this. Beggars belief. But anyway, 17mm, I'm going to opt for that. I'm not going to use the RP, I'm going to film with that of course, because we're going to be talking about the R5 and I need to show you my settings. So let me put my bag in a safe space and we'll look to see what shots we can get today, shall we? So one thing I always look to do, which is not in relation actually to the settings in the R5, but it is in relation to composition, and that is I try and use the camera without the tripod in the way to try and look what things are going to look like before positioning my tripod, because it can get pretty annoying to maneuver the whole thing around. Don't get hooked up on the back of the LCD basically. There's a really nice ceiling in here, so I'm going to try and frame that up at some point. I just don't quite know where it's going to work best, so I'm going to try and check it throughout and see if I can get something that's looking cool. So there's an interesting composition here, for example. You don't get a whole of the ceiling, but it makes a really nice shape. So I'm going to try that one first of all. Let's do that. So the first thing you'll see that I'm using with the R5 to assist me with this kind of photography is of course live view. I actually, if you press info a number of times, 2 times, you go through the different sort of overlays of the back of the screen. And I usually have it on the one that's got limited stuff visible. And that can really help you kind of position, and of course using the geared head, which we spoke about recently on the channel, linked above, I can position everything, look at the live view, and that's not a unique feature to this camera at all. Of course, live view has been around for years these days. It's used on nearly every single camera model. I'm going to keep looking, see if I can find something else. Okay, so the next one you're going to see me using is my in-camera spirit level. I actually have it so you press info and it comes to the spirit level, and I love to activate this to keep it on to get my shots nice and level in the back of the camera. I don't rely on anything on the tripod itself. I always rely on this, my eye, and of course in a combination with a kind of bonus tip of having the grid lines on, it helps me to kind of frame everything up using that LCD here in the back of the camera. Because I'm using a geared head like this, subtle adjustments are easy to kind of then see using the spirit level to make sure everything's nice and straight in the back of the camera, as it is here. So the next thing when it comes to settings in terms of looking at live view, I always limit it and I go through my info button. If you get this out of the box, you go through the info button, there's loads of stuff there. It just keeps going on and on. It seems like it's a never-ending menu. However, if you go into the actual menu itself and you go to the camera section, so the first section on the menu, go across to number 7 and down to shooting info display, you can actually go in here and you can actually change what's selected and what comes up. So for me, I just choose number 1, number 3, and number 5. So that's essentially, number 1 has got all the information, number 3 has literally just got the spirit level only, which is what we need, and number 5 has got like the ability to be able to go in and fine tune anything to do with the settings. So in other words, it's kind of the plain black screen with all of the information on it. And that's it, that's literally all I activate. So I thought I'd jump in and tell you that one too. Okay, so I've got up another composition. I quite like this one. Something a little bit different. It's kind of what I was looking at when I was set back there. So I quite like it. It's something a little bit different from my visits to here. The next thing, which is quite an obvious one too, in camera, I'm setting my exposure bracketing. And to be honest with you, I don't need 5, but I've activated 5, and you do that by going to menu, under the camera icon, the one near the end, next to the star, you can go down number 1 on that menu, number of bracketed shots 5, press the info, press the Q button, and you can open up the bracket into as far apart as you want them. And I've chosen 1 stop apart. Maintain all of the dynamic range in this scene, and there's quite a lot because we've got bright light, actually more importantly, coming in, which I'm trying to avoid with my compositions. So the other thing I always activate with when it comes to bracketing is my level increments, my exposure level increments. I usually do that 1/3 of a stop. I do that on purpose because I want fine-tune accuracy when I'm trying to get that middle exposure nailed when I'm getting my brackets. So I want to get that right, and I usually start on my brightest exposure and work backwards. So I look at the brightest one, do I need this? Then I pull 1 stop back, 1 stop back from there and get the 3 brackets, so on and so forth, depending on how many I need. I can then activate this, and it gives me really fine-tuned adjustments. So I've talked about it before, but I always have my manual focus peaking settings on. I have them on, and I have red activated, and you can kind of see that here in the back of the camera. So alongside the grid lines and the spirit level, we have focus peaking on. Because I've got a manual focus lens, it greatly assists me. Okay, also on the focus peaking, this isn't actually the tip. The tip for this is actually to go in and turn on the focus guide. This is probably the best tool available in the Canon R5, and I'm sure it's in many other models and types of cameras too. So you go into the menu, you go to the second section of the menu, autofocus. Number 2 in here, you've got focus guide, and what we want to do is we want to turn that on. What that basically allows me to do is, you see in the back of my camera many times, the little green box and the little green arrows, and they're basically like pointing at each other, the 2 arrows, like so. Now, best way to describe it is like this. When things are in focus, they're joined together like that, and when it's out of focus, it's kind of like this. So they kind of come together when you're trying to focus. Now that is a really interesting and brilliant piece of technology that helps me nail focus on a manual focus tilt shift lens. Now for architecture photography, that's pretty important. I'm just going to pause for a minute because people are coming, I told you. Now if you do come to places like this that are just like off the beaten path and they're kind of ruins, especially if they're accessible to the public, they won't be beautiful for everybody, but there's always going to be the inquisitive types who come and explore and have a little look around. Best thing to do is just be patient. While you were away, I just grabbed my camera, grabbed my recording setup, went over there, stood to one side, the family came on in, walked around, had a look, talked about it, and then left. If you try and stand your ground and just end up standing in their way, shooting, you're going to be waiting ages for them to kind of clear off, because basically what's going to happen is they're just going to want to get a quick phone shot and go, family snap, whatever it is, and leave. For me here, move out of their way, I can reset my shots quicker, and then I get the place back to myself again. Here I am with my camera on bricks again. It's a pretty cool composition. It's probably the best one in here, to be honest. Of course, it's more like a 1-point perspective. I'm going to make this shot a little bit more interesting. Hopefully, it's a little bit windy, but it might work. Once I've done that, I'll give you my other in-camera tips. Let's do this, shall we? Might be too windy. Yes, it's very windy. That's not good. Needs a lot more, and I need to be quicker. I need to try and time it when there's not as much wind. And this will look fantastic. I've got one shot that kind of looks okay. It's not perfect. A bit more. My shutter speed has got to be pretty fast to capture them. Pretty cool. Okay, that's our shots done. I'll put the lens cap back on and let's chat camera settings, shall we? Oh, it's pretty hot now. All that running around, let's take the jacket off. Pretty warm. I don't want to get it dirty, so we'll just chuck it on this rock here, shall we? So the next thing we're going to be discussing is my mode dial. Now basically, inside the mode dial, when you press mode, you've got the option to go from shutter priority, aperture priority, manual mode, bulb mode, and then you've got 3 C custom functions. And I've set all of them up. I've set C1, C2 and C3 up with basically settings that can help me work at speed. You saw me getting them shots there, kicking up some dust, grabbing some shots. I've got 3 setups built into this button, and depending on what type of scene I'm shooting, depends on which one that I select, and that can help me work at speed. So my first one, for example, just selects ISO 100, f8, standard go-to, with a shutter speed that's locked down, but I can move that very quickly just with this button here. No bracketing, auto white balance. C2 for me then activates bracketing. So in there, I've got 5 brackets locked in, 1 stop apart, ISO 200, f8, everything else remains the same. So in other words, I can very quickly just change the ISO if I want to ramp it up to 400 like I just did. Quick adjustment on my shutter speed. Got 5 brackets of a scene like this one here. Easy as that. Finally, we've got aperture priority mode, auto ISO, and then f2.8 or f4, depending on what lens is selected. And I've also got my focus mode being completely different. I've got it on people tracking, so face tracking, eye tracking, that kind of stuff. And that's for handheld, just every day, running around, running and gunning kind of photography. However, I also, when I flip that over, I've got that in video too. In my video, I have it all set up so I can do my kind of just everyday talking to camera shots. I've then got C2 set as my slow motion, 60 frames a second, and my C3 is 120 frames a second, super wow slow motion with higher ISOs because I'm usually hand holding, you know, my B-roll shots. So I would say always go to and use, if you can, set up in your camera any custom mode functions that you've got, because it can really help to speed up your workflow, even in static subjects like this, like interior photography. A couple of others that I use in camera that are probably a given really in architecture photography. I always activate my 2-second timer, goes without saying, it's on, you saw that there when I was shooting, regularly it's on. And other ones that I can think of is on my card that's saving my photos, I have RAW saved. We have standard switching on, so in other words, my photos are going to one card, my video onto another. But a copy of my RAW files goes to my large CF Express card, because this is huge, 256 gigabytes. So this is kind of providing my in-camera backup for me to my 64 gig smaller SD card for photos. And I have it set up so basically my video is going to one, photos on the other. I also have small JPEGs activated in case I want to pull them off of here, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, whatever, onto my phone to put on Instagram stories and such like. I don't do it that often, but I used to do it a lot more, but I do have it activated. And usually when I get home these days, all I do is I get hold of the raw files, and if I don't need the little JPEGs, I just bin them off, get rid, delete, whatever your language is. To be honest with you, I'm changing white balance, I'm changing that in camera. I do sometimes manually set that in here as well, on occasions. But one thing I do have, that is probably my last tip for you, is have white priority on my white balance set up. So it's in there as white priority. So it does help me try and maintain whites in interior spaces. So it's another little one for you. And I think, to be honest with you, that's pretty much me. Let's wrap up here, let's get another shot and we'll get on out, shall we? A couple of hours still to drive. It's been a lot of driving in the last few days. A few great images, and of course, personal project is why I was here. And all of that is to come on the channel over the course of the next 6 or maybe even 7 weeks. It's been some epic trips, epic journeys across the whole of Turkey. And all of that is to come on the channel, of course. If you've got any questions, leave them below. And until next time, bye-bye for now.